My name is Linda Hamilton, and at 62 years old, I thought I had finally stepped into the quiet chapter of my life. I spent most of my years teaching English literature at the local high school, pouring my energy into my students during the day, and my only daughter, Emily, at night. Life wasn't always kind. Losing my husband far earlier than I ever imagined left me navigating life on my own, but I managed. Through careful budgeting, long hours, and a stubborn refusal to give up, I kept a roof over our heads and food on the table. The house I lived in for decades wasn't grand, but it was my haven. The paint had faded in some spots, and the porch creaked under the weight of time, but to me, every sound was a memory. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the countless pies I baked over the years. The garden still held blooms my husband and I planted when Emily was just a little girl. Each room told a story. Each corner whispered of love, sacrifice, and resilience. Emily had grown up in that house, laughing, crying, stomping up the stairs during her teenage years, then crying on my shoulder during her first heartbreak. Despite the challenges of being a single parent, I prided myself on raising her into the woman she became, independent, strong-willed, and accomplished. She built a career, got married, and settled into her own home not far from mine. I thought we had both reached a place where life would finally allow us to just enjoy each other's company without the chaos of survival hanging over us. As the years passed, my circle grew smaller. Retirement brought a kind of peace, but it also brought silence. My days consisted of small routines, morning tea on the porch, grocery trips on Wednesdays, and a weekly call from Emily. She visited on holidays and birthdays, always bringing flowers or a pie from the bakery, insisting I shouldn't tire myself in the kitchen. I appreciated it, but there was always a faint distance in her eyes, as if she was already halfway out the door. One Sunday afternoon, she called unexpectedly. Her voice was unusually warm, almost coaxing. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking. You're all alone in that big house. Why don't you come stay with us for a while? It would be so much nicer than you being by yourself. You'll have company, and we can take care of you. It's the least we can do after everything you've done for me." Her words were like a gentle hand on my shoulder. I didn't hesitate. "Are you sure, sweetheart? I wouldn't want to impose." "You could never impose," she laughed. "Besides, the kids would love having you around. You know how much they adore their Grandma Linda." In that moment, my heart swelled. Loneliness had been a quiet shadow in my life for too long, and the idea of waking up to the sound of my grandchildren's laughter seemed like a blessing. I pictured myself reading bedtime stories again, cooking family dinners, and sitting at the table together just like old times. The following weeks were a flurry of sorting through my belongings, deciding what to bring and what to leave behind. Emily insisted I didn't need much. "Just the essentials, Mom. We have everything you'll need here." I packed clothes, a few books, framed photographs, and my teapot, because some comforts can't be left behind. Leaving my house was bittersweet. I locked the door and stood for a long moment on the porch, taking in the sight of the garden, the familiar chipped paint on the railing, and the worn welcome mat that had greeted countless guests over the years. I told myself it wasn't goodbye, just a new chapter. When I arrived at Emily's home, she greeted me at the door with a smile, her arms open wide. Her husband, Mark, came to help with my bags, and the children rushed forward with hugs. "Grandma's here," they shouted, their excitement making my heart light. Emily showed me to the guest room, a cozy space at the far end of the hall. "We thought you'd like a little privacy," she said warmly. The room was smaller than my old bedroom, but it was clean and tidy, with fresh sheets on the bed and a vase of flowers on the nightstand. It felt thoughtful, welcoming. That first evening was everything I hoped it would be. We had dinner together. Emily made roast chicken, and the kids argued over who got to sit next to me. We laughed, reminisced, and for the first time in years, I felt the warmth of being surrounded by family in a home filled with noise and life. As I went to bed that night, I thought to myself how lucky I was. My daughter had grown into a woman who cared enough to bring her mother into her home. My grandchildren were healthy and happy. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. I fell asleep with a heart full of gratitude, blissfully unaware that the comfort I felt would soon be tested in ways I could never have imagined. The first week in Emily's home felt like stepping into a warm memory. Every morning I woke to the sound of the kids thundering down the hallway, their giggles bouncing off the walls. Emily would already be in the kitchen, hair pulled back neatly, sleeves rolled up as she flipped pancakes or scrambled eggs. Mark, her husband, was polite and friendly, making small talk over coffee before rushing off to work. In those first days, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. I offered to help with meals, tidy up the house, or take the kids to school, but Emily insisted I should just relax and enjoy myself. "You've done enough your whole life, Mom," she said sweetly. "Now it's your turn to rest." At dinner, we'd sit together, talking about our days. Emily would tell stories about her work, Mark would chime in about some home project he was tackling, and the kids would compete to share their latest school adventures. I sat quietly sometimes, just listening, my heart full. Still, as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice small things. Emily was particular about her routines and her house. One afternoon, I decided to make an old family recipe for dinner while Emily was still at work. I pulled out a few ingredients and started prepping in the kitchen when she came home earlier than expected. "Oh, Mom," she said with a tight smile. "I appreciate the thought, but we try to keep the kitchen tidy during the week. It just helps me manage everything better." Her tone wasn't unkind, but there was a certain edge to it. I apologized, brushing it off as just her wanting order in her home. After all, it wasn't unreasonable to have preferences in your own kitchen. A few days later, she mentioned that the kids' bedtime routine was very structured. "If you could keep the noise down after 8 p.m., that would be great," she told me. Again, her voice was calm, but there was a formality to it I didn't quite recognize. It wasn't just the kitchen or bedtime. Emily began to subtly assign spaces in the house. The guest room was mine, of course, but she also suggested that I keep my personal things contained to my room just to avoid clutter. My books stayed stacked by my bedside instead of the living room shelves. My knitting basket moved from the couch to the closet. At first, I told myself these were small adjustments, simple compromises to live harmoniously. And truthfully, Emily was still warm most of the time. She thanked me for helping with the laundry, asked my opinion on dinner menus, and invited me to join her for coffee in the mornings. Mark, too, was friendly, though quieter. He treated me with politeness but kept a certain distance. He'd often retreat to his office after dinner, leaving Emily and me to tidy up. I couldn't tell if it was just his personality or if there was something else beneath the surface. One evening, Emily came home from work looking exhausted. She collapsed onto the couch beside me and sighed. "Mom, I don't know how you did it all those years," she said. "The kids, the house, work, it's overwhelming sometimes." I smiled, reaching over to pat her hand. "It wasn't easy, but you make it work because you have to, and you're doing wonderfully, Emily." She smiled back, but there was a flicker in her eyes I couldn't quite read. Another week passed, and I started to sense a subtle shift. Emily wasn't as quick to invite me into conversations about her day. She began to close the door to her home office when she took certain calls. At dinner, she sometimes seemed distracted, scrolling through her phone while Mark talked about his projects. The house still felt warm, but there was a thin undercurrent of something. Not hostility, but maybe formality, as though there was a line I wasn't supposed to cross. Then came a small moment that stayed with me. I was in the kitchen early one morning, making tea, when I overheard Emily talking quietly on the phone in the next room. "Yeah, she's settling in fine," she said. "No, it's not a big deal. It's just, having her here means we don't need to worry about a babysitter for the kids, and it's good to keep an eye on things." Her tone was casual, but the words pricked something deep inside me. I told myself I was probably reading too much into it. After all, I was here willingly. I wanted to help. And wasn't it natural for family to rely on each other? Still, as I went back to my tea, there was a small knot in my chest that hadn't been there before. I shook it off. This was Emily, my daughter. We'd always been close. If there were little adjustments to make, I'd make them. Family life was about compromise, and if I felt a touch of unease, surely it was just the challenge of settling into a new routine. That night at dinner, the kids chatted excitedly about an upcoming school project. Emily laughed at something Mark said, and I told myself everything was fine. I was happy. I had my family. That was all that mattered. But in the quiet of my room later, as I unpacked a few more of my things and tucked them neatly away, I couldn't help but notice how much smaller my life suddenly felt within these walls. It was a Thursday morning when I felt the familiar twinge in my chest again. It had been coming and going for weeks, and though I told myself it was probably nothing more than age catching up to me, I knew I should see a doctor. Emily was in the kitchen, packing lunches for the kids, her phone tucked between her shoulder and ear as she coordinated a work meeting. I waited until she hung up before speaking. "Emily," I began gently, "I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. I was wondering if you could take me. I don't like driving long distances alone anymore, and it would be nice to have you there." She didn't look up immediately, still sealing a sandwich bag. "Tomorrow?" she asked, her tone distracted. "Yes, just a routine checkup. It's in the morning, so it won't take long," I said, smiling to reassure her that it wasn't anything urgent. Emily finally glanced at me, and the look in her eyes caught me off guard. There was no irritation exactly, but there was no warmth either. She let out a small sigh. "Mom, I don't think I can. I've got meetings stacked all day, and besides..." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before continuing. "You're not the priority right now." The words hit me harder than I expected. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I blinked at her, unsure if I had heard correctly. "I'm not the priority?" I repeated softly, my voice catching. Emily didn't seem to notice the shift in my tone. She turned back to the counter, busying herself with the lunch boxes. "I just mean things are hectic right now, with the kids, with work. I can't just drop everything." I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest like cold stone. "I understand," I finally said, forcing a small smile. "I can manage on my own." She looked relieved, as if my agreement had lifted some burden from her shoulders. "Thanks, Mom, you're the best," she said, giving me a quick smile before rushing to gather her things. The moment was brief, but it changed something in me. The words replayed in my mind throughout the day. "You're not the priority anymore." I tried to shake it off. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe it was just the stress of her job, the exhaustion of parenting. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, the phrase lingered. Later that evening, I overheard Emily on the phone again. Her voice was calm, even cheerful. "Yeah, everything's fine here. Mom's settled in, the kids are happy. It's just, sometimes she needs things, and it's not always convenient, but she understands she's not the main focus anymore." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart aching. Not the main focus. That was how she saw me now, not as her mother who had once been the center of her world, but as someone on the periphery, someone who could be set aside when life got busy. The realization stung in a way I couldn't fully articulate. It wasn't about the doctor's appointment. It wasn't even about the words themselves. It was about what they revealed, a shift in how she valued me, in how I fit into her life. At dinner that night, everything appeared normal. Emily chatted about a project at work, Mark talked about needing to fix a leak in the garage, and the kids argued over dessert. I smiled, laughed at the right moments, and passed the mashed potatoes, all while feeling a quiet crack forming in the foundation of my place here. After the meal, Emily thanked me for helping clear the table. "You really make things easier around here," she said with a smile that on any other day might have warmed my heart. But tonight it felt like a transaction, a polite acknowledgement of utility, nothing more. That night, lying in the small bed of the guest room, I stared at the ceiling. I thought back to all the years I had been there for Emily. Every school recital, every heartbreak, every late-night phone call when she needed advice or comfort. I had never once considered her an inconvenience. She had always been my priority. And now, here I was, a guest in her home, told in no uncertain terms that the place I once held in her life had shifted. I felt the loneliness I thought I had escaped creeping back in, sharper now because it existed even in a house full of people. For the first time since moving in, I wondered if I had made a mistake. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that Emily's words had been nothing more than a poor choice of phrasing. I told myself she was under pressure. She had a demanding job, 2 energetic kids, a house to manage. It was only natural that she couldn't be everywhere at once. But the phrase wouldn't leave me. You're not the priority anymore. It played over and over in my mind like an unwelcome echo. I moved quietly through the house that week, careful not to create extra work for anyone. I folded laundry, tidied the living room, kept the kids entertained when Emily needed to work. I didn't want to burden her, so I stepped into the background, hoping my presence would feel less heavy. Still, I began to notice things I hadn't before. When the kids wanted to play outside, Emily would hand them over to me. "Mom, can you take them to the park? I've got a deadline." When errands needed to be run, I was the one sent to pick up groceries or grab supplies for school projects. It dawned on me slowly. Emily wasn't just inviting me into her home for company. I had become a convenience, someone to fill in the gaps, to carry the weight of the household where it suited her. The first time I suggested visiting my old neighbor, Mrs. Coleman, Emily hesitated. "Oh, Mom, that might not be a good idea. The kids have activities all week, and I'll need your help here. Maybe another time." Another time never seemed to come. My world began to shrink even more, contained within the walls of Emily's home. I went from being the woman who could run her own house, handle her own life, to someone who seemed to need permission just to step outside her daughter's front door. One afternoon, I was in the hallway folding laundry when I heard Emily's voice from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone light and casual. "Yes, she's here now. It's actually been helpful. We don't need to hire a babysitter, and the house runs smoother. It's like having an extra pair of hands." There was a pause, and then she laughed softly. "Yeah, she's basically just living here, kind of like a guest. It works out." I stopped mid-fold, my breath catching in my chest. A guest. That was what I had become in my daughter's eyes. Not her mother, not a cherished part of her household, but someone staying in her home. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, shock, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. I wanted to believe she didn't mean it in a hurtful way, but the word guest cut deeper than I expected. That night at dinner, I studied her face as she talked about her day. She seemed so normal, so at ease, as if nothing had changed. I smiled when she smiled, answered when she spoke to me, all while feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. Later, in the quiet of my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of it. Guest. The term implied I was temporary, that I didn't truly belong here. It was a polite way of keeping me at a distance, of reminding me, perhaps unconsciously, that this was her house, her rules, her life. I thought about my own home, the one I'd left behind. There, I had been the center of everything. My opinions mattered. My routines shaped the household. Here, I was a visitor in a space that used to feel like a shared life. The realization brought with it a quiet ache, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you feel colder, even in a warm room. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I carried on, helping where I could, staying out of the way where I couldn't. But a seed had been planted, a small, unshakable awareness that my place here was not as secure as I had once believed. And for the first time since moving in, I began to wonder what it would mean to reclaim my space, my independence, and perhaps my dignity. I had always been a quiet observer, a habit that came from years of teaching. In a classroom, you learn to notice the subtle things, the shift in a student's posture, the hesitation in their voice, that reveal more than words ever could. Now, in Emily's home, that skill returned almost instinctively. At first, it was nothing obvious. A piece of mail on the kitchen counter with my name on it, but addressed to Emily's house. I picked it up, surprised. It was a generic flyer from the city council. I assumed it was a simple clerical error. Maybe my name was still in some outdated database. I set it aside, not thinking much of it. But then another envelope arrived, this one from the county tax office. Again, it had my name, not Emily's, and the address of her house. This one Emily grabbed quickly as she sorted the mail. "Oh, that's nothing, Mom," she said casually, slipping it into a drawer. "Probably some leftover paperwork from when we updated the address for your pension." Her explanation seemed reasonable, but a faint unease settled over me. Why would county tax paperwork still have my name attached? Over the next few weeks, I started to pay more attention. I noticed other small details. A mortgage statement Emily hurriedly tucked away, the way she avoided talking about certain financial matters when I was around, the fact that some of the property documents in the home office still had my handwriting on them from years ago. One rainy afternoon, while Emily was at work and the kids were at school, I offered to help tidy the home office. It was stacked with papers, bills, and old files. I told myself I was just organizing, but deep down, curiosity tugged at me. As I sorted through a pile of folders, I found an old manila envelope labeled Property Transfer, 2017. My breath caught as I slid the documents out. They were the deed papers for my old house, my house, the very one Emily now lived in. I remembered that year all too well. I had been in a tight financial spot after an unexpected medical expense and a string of home repairs. Emily and Mark had suggested transferring the title to them so they could refinance at a better rate. "It's just paperwork, Mom," Emily had reassured me at the time. "You'll still live here if you want, but this way we can help keep everything afloat." I had agreed because I trusted her. She was my daughter, and at the time it had seemed like the only option to keep from drowning in bills. Now, staring at the documents, the reality sank in. The house wasn't just theirs because they lived in it. It was legally in Emily's name. I had stepped away from ownership years ago. But then, something caught my eye. Attached to the back of the file was a smaller document, an older agreement I barely remembered. It was a stipulation in the original mortgage, one that noted my continued association with the property for tax purposes. My name was still listed on certain county records. I leaned back in the chair, the rain tapping against the window as a strange mixture of emotions washed over me. The house I was now a guest in had once been mine, and while the title had changed, there were threads of connection still there, buried in the paperwork, invisible unless you knew where to look. I closed the envelope and set it back exactly as I'd found it. I wasn't ready to confront Emily, not yet, but the knowledge shifted something inside me. This wasn't just about feeling unwelcome. This was about the deeper reality that I had traded ownership for trust, and now I was living in the shadow of that decision. That night at dinner, Emily laughed at something Mark said. The kids chattered about a school play, and I smiled along. But beneath my calm exterior, my mind was turning over what I had discovered. I was no longer just a mother feeling hurt by careless words. I was a woman starting to see the shape of a bigger truth. For the first time since moving in, I felt a quiet spark of something that wasn't sadness or resignation. It was curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of resolve. The discovery of the deed was like a loose thread in a sweater. I couldn't stop tugging at it, wondering what else was woven into the fabric of this arrangement that I hadn't seen before. Over the next week, whenever Emily and Mark were busy or out of the house, I carefully revisited the office. I didn't snoop with malice. I told myself I was simply looking for clarity, but deep down, I knew I was searching for something more, proof that I wasn't as powerless here as I felt. In the bottom drawer of a metal filing cabinet tucked behind old bank statements and insurance forms, I found another folder, older, dustier, and marked with a county seal. The label read Land Use Agreement, 2002. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were pages of legal jargon, but one paragraph caught my eye. It stated that when the property was refinanced years ago, a provision had been added granting me lifetime usage rights as part of the agreement. It meant that while the deed had been transferred, I still had legal standing in certain aspects of the property's use. I stared at the page, my heart pounding. Emily had never mentioned this. Perhaps she didn't even know. It was possible she'd only focused on the title transfer and never looked deeper into the fine print. I read the clause over and over again, my mind racing. I wasn't a legal expert, but I knew enough to understand this could change things. I wasn't just a guest here. I was tied to the property in a way that might give me leverage. I placed the papers back carefully, closing the drawer as quietly as I had opened it. I needed time to think, to decide what to do next. That evening, Emily seemed in good spirits, chatting about an upcoming family vacation they were planning for the summer. She didn't notice the shift in me, the way my eyes lingered on her just a little longer, as if trying to read what she didn't say. Over the next few days, I began paying closer attention to the household finances. I noticed more envelopes from the county tax office, some of which seemed to sit unopened for days. One afternoon, when Emily was out running errands, I saw a bright yellow slip stuck to the side of the refrigerator, property tax due, final notice. My pulse quickened. I read the fine print. It wasn't a massive amount, but it was overdue. And if it wasn't paid, there could be penalties, possibly even legal action. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of me was concerned. This was, after all, the home where my grandchildren lived. But another part of me recognized something else. This was a vulnerability, a pressure point. I slipped the notice back exactly where I'd found it, careful not to disturb anything. I wasn't going to act on it immediately, but the knowledge lodged itself firmly in my mind. That night, as I sat in the guest room with the door slightly ajar, I heard Emily talking on the phone again. Her tone was lower, almost frustrated. "Yeah, I know it's due. We've just had so many expenses lately, I'll figure it out. It's not like Mom's going anywhere. She's comfortable here. She doesn't need to know." The words hit me in two ways. First, the assumption that I was in the dark about everything. Second, the certainty with which she believed I was powerless to change anything. I leaned back against my chair, my thoughts sharper than they'd been in months. I realized then that Emily wasn't malicious. She was complacent. She thought the situation was fixed in her favor, that I was simply along for the ride. But she was wrong. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like someone holding a card no one knew I had, and I wasn't about to waste it. The clause about lifetime usage rights stayed in my mind like a steady drumbeat. I didn't know the full scope of what it meant, but I knew enough to realize it could shift the balance of power. Still, assumptions wouldn't help me. I needed clarity. So, one quiet Tuesday morning, while Emily was at work and the kids were at school, I made an appointment with an attorney downtown. His name was Mr. Brooks, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. After explaining my situation, I slid the land use agreement across his desk. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the document carefully. For a few long minutes, the only sound was the soft rustle of paper. Finally, he looked up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Mrs. Hamilton, you have something very valuable here. This isn't just a symbolic clause. This is a binding legal agreement. It grants you lifetime usage rights, and, under state law, those rights give you a legitimate position regarding the property. If you wished, you could register yourself as a co-beneficiary for any lease arrangement." I blinked at him, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "Are you saying I could become the landlord?" "In a way, yes. he said, leaning back in his chair. "You wouldn't be the title owner, but you hold what's called a retained life estate interest. That means you have a stake in how the property is used, rented, or even transferred. And if the current owners, your daughter and son-in-law, make certain financial moves without considering this clause, they could be in violation." A slow, dawning awareness filled me. I wasn't powerless here. I had more standing than I'd ever realized. Mr. Brooks shuffled through another file. "There's something else. I checked the county property records before you came in. Your daughter and her husband recently initiated a process to leverage the house for a home equity loan. Essentially, they're using it as collateral to secure additional financing." My stomach tightened. "A loan? For what?" "That I can't say," he replied. "But I can tell you this. If they proceed, the lender will have to verify all interests in the property. Your retained rights could complicate the process. In some cases, the bank might require your consent or even reconfigure the terms entirely." It was like the ground had shifted beneath my feet, but this time in my favor. The house I'd been told wasn't mine. The home where I was now treated as a guest was still tethered to me in ways Emily clearly didn't understand. "Mr. Brooks," I said carefully, "if I wanted to formalize my position, what would I need to do?" He smiled faintly. "Documentation, of course, and timing. You'd want to act before any financial transactions are finalized, but you have the legal right to step in. The key is preparation. Don't announce your hand too early." As I left his office, the autumn air felt sharper, almost invigorating. For weeks, I'd been weighed down by hurt and resignation, but now there was something else humming under my skin: resolve. Back at Emily's house, she greeted me casually, asking how my errands had gone. I smiled, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, just fine. Nothing exciting." Inside, my thoughts were anything but calm. I knew something Emily didn't. She and Mark were standing on unstable ground, and if they weren't careful, they could lose far more than they realized. That evening at dinner, Emily chatted about a new investment she and Mark were considering. "We might finally start that home renovation," she said brightly. "Mark's been talking to the bank about some options." I stirred my soup slowly, my expression neutral. That sounds ambitious. She didn't notice the weight behind my words. She went on about how the upgrades would increase the home's value, how it was all part of a bigger plan. I nodded, but in the back of my mind, I pictured the paperwork in Mr. Brooks's office, the signatures, the clauses, the hidden hooks buried in legal language. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just a passive player in this story. I was holding a card they didn't even know was in the game. And if the time came, I was ready to play it. After leaving Mr. Brooks's office, I knew one thing for certain. The worst thing I could do right now was show my hand too soon. Emily and Mark believed they were in control, and for the plan to work, that belief needed to stay intact. So I slipped into the role they expected me to play, the quiet, agreeable mother who stayed out of the way. I helped with dinner, watched the kids, kept the house tidy. I smiled when Emily chatted about her work, nodded when Mark discussed renovation plans. On the surface, nothing had changed, but underneath, everything was shifting. At night, when the house was quiet, I began my preparations. I dug out my old file box from the guest room closet, the one Emily thought only contained family photos and recipe cards. Hidden inside, I now kept neatly organized copies of the land agreement, the deed transfer, and the property tax notices I discreetly photographed. Mr. Brooks had been clear. If I wanted to formalize my position, I needed to act strategically. So he helped me draft a new rental agreement, one that legally established my right to collect rent from the property should it be leased. It wasn't about money. It was about control. If Emily and Mark wanted to move forward with their loan, they'd have to face the reality of my retained interest. Each evening, I reviewed the documents, making small adjustments. I practiced how I would present them, rehearsing my tone so it wouldn't come across as anger or desperation, but calm authority. Meanwhile, I began planting the seeds of my plan. Over dinner one night, I casually asked, "So, how's the renovation planning going?" Emily brightened immediately. "It's coming along. Mark's been talking to the contractor and the bank is moving forward with the financing. It's going to make a huge difference for the house." "That sounds wonderful," I said, my voice even. "It must be a lot of work, though. So many papers to sign, so many details to keep track of." She laughed lightly. "Tell me about it. I swear half the process is just signing documents." Exactly, I thought. Half the process, and they have no idea one signature is missing. I didn't ask questions that would make her suspicious. Instead, I let her talk, drawing out little pieces of information, timelines, deadlines, and which meetings she and Mark were planning with the bank. Every detail was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. As the days passed, my outward demeanor remained the same. I baked cookies with the kids, helped them with homework, and chatted about upcoming holidays. Emily seemed reassured, perhaps even smug, believing I had fully adjusted to life as the guest in her home. But in my quiet moments, I was setting the stage. I organized the rental agreement into a tidy folder. I included copies of the lifetime usage clause, tax documents, and a legal letter from Mr. Brooks explaining my standing. I placed everything into a neat leather portfolio, the kind that looked more like business than family dispute. I also began considering the timing. Mr. Brooks had advised me to wait until Emily and Mark were deep into the loan process, ideally just before they reached a point of no return. That way, the impact of my revelation would be undeniable. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One evening, I overheard Mark on the phone with the bank, confirming a meeting for the following week to finalize loan details. His voice was upbeat, confident. He clearly believed everything was in order. That night, as I prepared dinner, I smiled quietly to myself. The pieces were aligning perfectly. Over dessert, I looked at Emily and said casually, "We should plan a nice family dinner soon, just the four of us, adults. It's been a while since we sat down together without the kids running around." Emily looked pleased. "That's a great idea, Mom. Maybe next Friday? We'll have just finished all the loan paperwork by then, so it'll be a nice way to celebrate." "Perfect," I said, hiding the small flicker of satisfaction in my chest. As I cleared the table that night, Emily thanked me for helping out so much around the house. "You really make things easier for us, Mom," she said warmly. I smiled back, my voice steady. "I'm glad I can help." She didn't notice the difference in my tone. She didn't see the quiet calculation behind my eyes. In a week's time, the celebration she imagined would turn into something entirely different. The days leading up to Friday felt like a long, steady inhale. Everything in the house carried on as usual. Emily rushing between work and school pickups, Mark tinkering with home projects, the kids buzzing about weekend plans. Beneath the rhythm of daily life, I could feel the weight of what was coming, like a storm that hadn't yet reached the horizon. I went about my routines as if nothing was unusual. I baked pies, I helped the kids with homework, I even accompanied Emily on a shopping trip, smiling and nodding as she talked about the renovations the loan would make possible. Inside, I knew the timing couldn't be more perfect. On Thursday evening, I confirmed our celebration dinner. Emily seemed pleased. "It's nice you're doing this, Mom," she said. "You've been such a help. I don't know what we'd do without you." Her words carried the same surface warmth I'd heard for weeks, but now they landed differently. I smiled gently, tucking the comment away. They truly have no idea what's about to happen. Friday evening came. The kids were at a friend's house for a sleepover, leaving the four of us, just the adults, around the table. I'd prepared a full meal: roast chicken, garlic potatoes, fresh bread, and the pie Emily had always loved. As we sat down, the atmosphere was light. Mark poured wine, Emily laughed at something on her phone, and the conversation flowed easily. It almost felt like old times, back when there was no tension, no hidden layers beneath our words. Halfway through the meal, Mark raised his glass. "Here's to new beginnings," he said, glancing at Emily. "The loan will go through next week. Renovations will start soon. We're moving forward." Emily clinked her glass against his. "It's going to be amazing. Everything is finally falling into place." I smiled, raising my own glass. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I thought this would be the perfect time to talk about something important, something that affects all of us. They both looked at me, curiosity flickering in their expressions. I set my wine glass down, reached to the side of my chair, and lifted the leather portfolio onto the table. I could see the small crease appear between Emily's brows. "What's that?" she asked, her tone cautious. I opened the portfolio slowly, the papers neatly organized inside. "It's a little update on my living arrangements here," I said calmly. "I wanted to make sure everything is clear and formalized, so there's no confusion moving forward." Emily laughed lightly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom, you don't need to worry about that. You know you're welcome here." "That's kind of you, Emily," I said, my voice steady, "but it's more than just being welcome. You see, after reviewing the property documents with my attorney, we realized something important. Under the retained life estate agreement from 2002, I have a legal interest in this home. That means I have the right to be registered as the primary lessor, essentially the landlord." The room went still. Mark's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Emily blinked at me, her smile faltering. "I'm sorry." "What?" I slid the top document toward them. "Starting next month, I'll be formalizing my position. I'll be listed as the primary landlord on record. It won't change your ability to live here, of course, but it does mean any significant financial transactions, like, say, a home equity loan, will need my signature moving forward." Emily's face drained of color. Mark set his fork down carefully, his voice tight. "Linda, this is unexpected. We didn't know." "That's because you never looked closely," I said gently, my tone free of accusation. "You saw the title transfer, but not the fine print. I didn't want to interfere, but with the loan coming through, I thought it best to make sure everything is in proper order." Emily's eyes darted to the papers, scanning the highlighted sections. This can't be right." "It's all perfectly legal," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Mr. Brooks, my attorney, has confirmed everything. I'm not here to cause trouble, Emily. I just want to ensure everyone understands the arrangement clearly. No surprises later." Silence stretched across the table. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the documents as if they might rearrange themselves into something less troubling. Finally, I leaned back in my chair, my tone softening. "I know you've been working hard to build your life here. I'm not here to take that from you, but I am part of this home, legally, financially, and emotionally, and from this point forward, that will be reflected officially." Emily's gaze lifted to mine, and for the first time in weeks, there was no practiced warmth in her eyes, just raw, stunned realization. The storm had arrived. Emily stared at the papers in front of her as if they were written in another language. "This doesn't make any sense," she said, her voice sharp now, tinged with panic. "How can you have this kind of authority? The house is in my name." Mark leaned forward, his brows knit tightly. "Linda, we appreciate everything you've done, but this is a misunderstanding. We've been managing this house for years. There's no way the bank would let something like this slip by." I met his gaze steadily. "The bank didn't overlook anything, Mark. You did. You assumed that transferring the deed erased all other interests, but the retained life estate agreement is a legally binding document. It doesn't just disappear because it's inconvenient." Emily's hand went to her forehead, her breathing shallow. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" I kept my tone even, because until now it didn't matter. I trusted you to manage the home, and I was content to live quietly here. But when I learned you were planning to leverage the property for a loan, I realized my position needed to be clear. Her eyes snapped up to mine, widening. You know about the loan?" I reached into the portfolio again, sliding out a second set of documents. "Yes, these are copies of the county tax notices, the property filings, and the preliminary loan application submitted to the bank. The lender's records show that the property is being used as collateral. Under the law, my signature is required to finalize any such transaction." Mark's mouth fell open slightly, his confidence faltering. You've been looking at our financial records?" I gave him a faint, steady smile. "I haven't been looking into your private matters, Mark. I've been looking at the property records. Public information, I might add. The house may be in your name, but my legal rights are part of that property, and the bank will see it exactly the same way." Emily's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly. "This can't be happening. We've planned everything. This loan, the renovations, the timeline, it all depends on this going through." Her voice was shaking now, the same daughter who once told me I was not the priority anymore, now realizing her plans were not the priority either. Not without my consent. I folded my hands on the table, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to ruin your plans, Emily, but I am here to make sure any decisions about this home are made with transparency. I will not sign away my rights just because it's convenient." Mark rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. "So what now? You're saying you have the power to block the loan entirely?" I nodded once. "If I choose to, but I'd rather work together. I want to see the home maintained, but I won't allow decisions that jeopardize it or my place here without my agreement." Emily sank back into her chair, her face pale. The confidence she had carried for weeks was gone, replaced by the dawning realization that she could not move forward without me. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet clink of silverware as Mark set down his fork, untouched. Finally, I leaned forward slightly, my tone softening but my words deliberate. "I raised you to understand responsibility, Emily. This house is more than just a structure. It's where we built our lives. I trusted you when I transferred the deed. That trust hasn't disappeared, but it will be matched now by clear boundaries. From this point forward, I am officially registered as the primary landlord. Any major decisions will go through me." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "So, what does that mean for us?" "It means you still live here. You still have your home, but you also have accountability. And for the loan, well, that will depend on whether the terms are fair for everyone involved." The air was thick with the weight of the shift. For weeks I had been the quiet, invisible presence in the house. Now the balance had shifted entirely, and Emily and Mark sat across from me, not as the unquestioned heads of the household, but as people who suddenly realized the roof over their heads was not solely theirs to control. Emily opened her mouth, closed it again, then looked down at the papers one more time. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed them back toward me. I don't know what to say. I offered her a small, steady smile. "You don't need to say anything tonight. Just understand that things have changed. And from here on, we'll move forward with honesty." She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "All right, Mom." The room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, one filled not with dismissal, but with acknowledgement. The week after the dinner was tense. Emily avoided long conversations with me, her words clipped, her movements brisk. Mark was more polite than usual, but the careful distance in his tone was impossible to miss. The house felt different, quieter somehow, as if everyone was walking on glass. I didn't press. I went about my days as I always had, making breakfast for the kids, keeping the house tidy, and offering help when it was needed. But beneath the surface, the paperwork was moving forward. Mr. Brooks had drafted the final rental agreement, formalizing my position as the primary landlord. Emily and Mark would be listed as tenants, continuing to reside in the home, but now under an agreement that acknowledged my legal rights. It wasn't about rent. It was about ensuring boundaries and respect. The signing day came a week later. We sat at the dining room table again, though the mood was far more restrained this time. Emily read through the document silently, her fingers tightening slightly around the pen. Mark leaned over her shoulder, his expression tight, but resigned. Finally, Emily let out a slow breath. "I can't believe we're doing this," she said, her voice quiet. "This isn't punishment, Emily," I said softly. "It's clarity. We're putting things in writing so we all know where we stand. This house is your home, but it's my home too, and that will be respected." She glanced at me, her jaw tightening for a moment, then she signed. Mark followed suit, his signature neat but quick. When the last page was signed, I gathered the papers carefully, placing them back in the leather portfolio. "Thank you," I said simply. For a while after that, the air remained stiff. Emily was polite, but her warmth was gone. She kept her conversations brief, and I gave her space. I knew she needed time to process the change, to adjust to this new reality where I wasn't just a passive guest in her home. Weeks passed. Slowly, the tension began to ease. It started in small ways. Emily lingered in the kitchen one evening after dinner, asking about a recipe I used to make when she was a child. Another time, she sat beside me on the couch while I knitted, absent-mindedly chatting about her workday. It wasn't the same as before, not yet, but there was a subtle shift. The careful edge in her voice was softening. One afternoon, I heard her on the phone with a friend. "It's been an adjustment," she admitted. "But I think it's better now. Things are clearer. We don't have misunderstandings about who's responsible for what." Her words surprised me. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and that was more than I'd expected so soon. By the end of the month, life in the house had settled into a new rhythm. Emily no longer treated me as an outsider or as unpaid help. She asked my opinion on house matters, consulted me about schedules, and even suggested we make decisions about the home together. Mark, too, seemed more at ease. While we weren't suddenly close, there was a certain respect in his tone that hadn't been there before. He began including me in discussions about repairs and future projects, something he had always discussed exclusively with Emily before. The kids noticed the difference as well. They didn't understand the legalities, of course, but they sensed the shift. They stopped coming to me in whispers, worried they might be bothering me. Instead, they came openly, pulling me into games and school projects as though I was a central figure again, not someone on the sidelines. One evening, as Emily and I stood side by side in the kitchen washing dishes, she broke the silence. "Mom, I know I didn't handle things well before." I looked at her, surprised at the rare vulnerability in her voice. She kept her eyes on the sink. I didn't realize how it felt for you. I saw you as part of the household, but I treated you like you were just visiting. That wasn't fair." I placed a clean plate in the rack and smiled faintly. "It's easy to overlook things when life gets busy. I don't hold a grudge, Emily. I just want us to move forward in a way that works for both of us." She glanced at me then, her expression softer than it had been in months. "I want that, too." It wasn't a grand reconciliation. There were no tears or dramatic apologies. But in that quiet moment, over a sink full of soapy water, I felt the first real sign of respect returning between us. The house felt different now, not just because of the legal papers, but because of the unspoken understanding that things had changed. I was no longer the quiet guest in the corner. I was part of the foundation again. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like we were building something new, together. Months passed, and the house found its balance again. The air no longer carried the heavy tension of unspoken resentment. Life resumed its steady rhythm, but this time with clear boundaries. I was no longer the invisible presence drifting along the edges of the household. My position, both legal and personal, was firmly rooted. Emily had adjusted, even if reluctantly at first. We still had moments of friction, as any family living under one roof does, but there was respect now. When she made decisions about the house, she consulted me. When plans affected the family, she invited my input. It wasn't perfect, but it was a far cry from the quiet dismissal I'd felt in those first weeks. The children, blissfully unaware of the legal twists that had unfolded, treated me as they always had. Someone who would show up at school events, who baked their favorite cookies, who sat with them at bedtime to hear about their day. That unchanging love was my anchor through everything. I had my independence, and more importantly, I had my dignity. My life in this house was no longer defined by silent compromises or overlooked sacrifices. I was here because I belonged, not because I was allowed. Still, I had learned an important lesson. Trust is a precious thing, and it is not invincible. I trusted Emily once without question. That trust was not gone, but it had been reshaped, tempered by reality. One quiet afternoon, I sat at my desk in the guest room, now redecorated into a cozy space that truly felt like my own, and drafted a new will. It wasn't a grand act of vengeance. It was practicality. I wanted to ensure that my assets, modest as they were, would be handled in a way that honored the values I lived by. I decided Emily would inherit part of the estate, but not all of it. A portion would be set aside for the grandchildren in a trust they could access when they were older. Another portion would go to causes I cared about deeply: local libraries, a scholarship fund for students who wanted to study literature. I didn't tell Emily about the will. There was no need. It wasn't a threat, just a quiet decision that spoke to the life I wanted to leave behind. But I knew, in a way, that this was also my final safeguard. The house had settled into its new normal. We celebrated birthdays, shared holiday dinners, and even laughed together on the porch in the evenings. The sharp edges of our conflict had smoothed, though the lessons they carved into us remained. One crisp autumn morning, I stood in the kitchen, the soft light spilling through the window. I brewed a pot of tea, the steam curling upward like a ribbon, carrying the familiar scent of chamomile. The house was quiet. Emily had gone to work, the kids were at school, and Mark was away on business. I carried my tea to the porch, settling into the old rocking chair that creaked in its familiar rhythm. The garden stretched before me, the leaves just beginning to turn, the colors deepening into reds and golds. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had fought for my place and reclaimed my voice. The victory wasn't loud or showy. It was in the small, everyday moments, the respect in Emily's tone, the way decisions were shared, the knowledge that I was no longer at the mercy of someone else's priorities. I took a slow sip of tea, the warmth spreading through me. A smile tugged at my lips, not of smugness, but of quiet satisfaction. The road hadn't been easy, but I had held my ground. I had reminded everyone, including myself, that my life still held value, that my years of sacrifice had not made me invisible. And as the morning sun rose higher, I thought to myself, this is what justice feels like.